This is the Performing Arts Center here at Quartz Mountain. This is where you'll see the orchestra perform and the chorus. It's where you'll see the dancers and actors perform. It's also where you'll come every night to see one of the world-class faculty members deliver a presentation some kind about their career, their craft, how they learned, what it was like for them when they were your age. This stage has had renowned conductors, movie stars, award-winning musicians, painters and photographers who've exhibited all over the world, famous writers. Coming in here is just always exciting. Yeah, all right. Leaving the Performing Arts Center in the middle of the day can be rough. If you've ever left a movie theater in the middle of the day after a matinee, you know what this feels like. Of course, what's going on is it was dark in there, and so my eyes had adjusted to that by opening their irises, their pupils really wide to let in enough light for me to see. They were still open really wide when I came out here into full daylight, and so they let in too much light, which I experienced as pain, and I also couldn't see very well. In other words, my eyes were set for proper exposure in there, and I came into a different situation, and they were no longer set for the right exposure. The exact same thing can happen with your camera. We've already explained that if an image is too dark, you may not be able to see detail in areas where you want it. Or, if it's too bright, you may not be able to see detail in other areas where you want it. In other words, you need to capture the correct amount of light for your particular scene. Just as the iris in your eye needs to be open to a certain amount to get enough light for you to be able to see, but not so much that you experience pain. On a camera, you have two different mechanisms for controlling how much light makes it through the lens to the focal plane. The focal plane is where your imaging material sits, whether that's a digital image sensor or a piece of film. Too much light striking the focal plane will leave your image overexposed. Too little will leave it underexposed. To control that, your camera has an iris, just like your eye does. The iris is a series of interlocking metal blades. You can see it open and close. Obviously, when it's smaller, less light will get to the focal plane and my image will be darker. If I open up the iris, my image will get brighter. Every time I change the size of the opening enough that I have either doubled or halved the amount of light that's passing through, we say that I have changed the aperture by one stop. Remember, one stop of light is always a doubling or halving. We measure the size of the aperture using a scale called f-stop. Inside the camera body, there's something called a shutter. It's usually a pair of curtains that opens and closes. The first curtain opens to reveal the focal plane, then the second curtain closes. The longer the curtain is open, the more light that strikes the focal plane. This is all pretty simple, right? So why do I need more than one mechanism? Because both the aperture and shutter speed do more than just brighten or darken your image. What do you suppose happens if the shutter is open for a while and during that time I move around? If you said that the resulting image will look blurry, you're correct. Shutter speed gives you control of how motion appears in your image. If I'm photographing something that's moving, then I may want to let the image blur to convey a sense of speed. Look at these two portraits. Mostly they look the same, but can you spot a difference? If you said the background is blurry in this one, that's the answer I was looking for. Depth of field is the amount of depth in an image that is in focus. This image has shallow depth of field, so the background is blurry. In this image, everything is sharp thanks to its deep depth of field. Aperture is how you control depth of field. If you choose a small aperture, a very small hole, you'll get more depth of field than if you choose a large aperture, a very big hole. Motion blur, depth of field, these are artistic choices you get to make, and you achieve them through exposure control by choosing a shutter speed and aperture that will yield the look that you want. Fortunately, your camera has something on it called a light meter, which makes all of that much easier. A full discussion of exposure would take more time than we have here in this course, but there are plenty of places you can learn about it. First of all, if your school or local library has access to linkedinlearning.com, you can watch my very detailed exposure course called Photography Foundations Exposure. Just search for my name on that site. If you don't have access to LinkedIn Learning, then go to YouTube and search for exposure triangle. There are lots of good videos up there that detail the exposure triangle. It's called a triangle because there's a third parameter called ISO, which also factors into exposure. It doesn't really provide a creative impact, it just allows you to get more latitude in your shutter speed or aperture so that you can achieve what you want with those. Your smartphone camera makes all of these exposure calculations automatically. Even a fancy digital SLR or mirrorless camera will still have a fully automatic mode that calculates exposure for you. On a modern camera or smartphone, these automatic modes are really good. They will choose a good exposure for 80% of the photos that you may take, maybe more than that. But there are times when, to get the image that you have in mind, you need to take control yourself. You need to move into a mode that provides more manual control and make some exposure decisions. It doesn't take long to learn exposure theory, and it's not complicated. Knowing it well will not only lead you to take better pictures, it'll give you a leg up when you audition for OSAI.